Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into your story, your journey, how you help so many entrepreneurs build the life that they truly want with passive income and all these amazing things. But why don't we start with who is Jamie today? And then we'll break down how you got there. Because I know I've looked into it. I know it's quite the journey.
It is quite the journey. I love that question. And it's funny, like when you're kind of like a multi-hyphenate, sometimes that's the hardest question. People will be like, so Jamie, who are you? And I'm like, stumped. But I got it. I can answer this question. No, I can tell you who I am today. And that is I'm a media personality, podcaster, one-on-one coach, TEDx and keynote speaker. So I really kind of do it all. And I speak specifically around wellness and mindset optimization and this key term that I call gratitudology, which is actually a word that I trademarked and then turned into my podcast.
I love it. Yeah. And so, look, obviously, there's a lot to unpack there, right? Like, and it's so funny that you said I'm like I do all the things, and that's kind of the entrepreneur of 2024. Like people are like, "What do
Yeah.
you do?" And I always just kind of default to podcaster because that's
Right.
kind of like the center of my wheel, and everything kind of spins off of that. Would you say, obviously, with your podcast, Gratitudology, is that the center of your wheel and everything comes off of that, or was that like, oh, hey, here's an opportunity for a marketing arm? Because I know everybody uses podcasts differently.
It started as an opportunity for a marketing arm because Gratitudology is one of my two signature keynotes that I give on stage. And I was like, this feels like a podcast because every thought leader, celebrity, 8 and 9 figure entrepreneur that I talk to has their why story, that pivot point where something happened, the tides changed, they started the switch flip. They started seeing life through a lens of gratitude. And then like that spurred their success going forward. And I'm like, that is an opportunity for deep narrative storytelling. And that's the kind of podcast I love. So like honestly, like Justin, I had a podcast for 4 years, which I loved doing it. It was called Off the Gram. It was fabulous. We won awards. We had a great run. We did a partnership with, we were literally launched Dr. Oz's OzTube platform. We were one of the like first podcasts on his platform. We did a ton with the show. I co-hosted it with a couple other women in wellness, and it was fun. It was a chat show. And after 4 years of doing the chat show, I was like, it feels like we done did it. Like it feels like we did what we set out to do. Like we finished. You know what I mean? Like when you wake
Yeah.
up one day and you're like, I'm done. I'm a podcast junkie. I'm a podcast geek. I love podcasts, especially immersive audio theater, like, but not fiction, like investigative journalism. Like I love Serial. I love Wondery podcast, right? Like you tell me a story and I'm in. It had been my dream to create a podcast that was storytelling like that. And I was like, oh my God, Gratitudology is my framework for this. I'm going to do a deep dive with one high profile figure at a time and go into their story, understand that moment where they started really seeing their life through a lens of gratitude because something happened. I mean, it's usually, it could be a near death experience. For me, it was my addiction. It could be an IVF journey. You made your first million, you lost your first million, whatever. And then like you got this new outlook. And then how did that spur your success going forward? So and this time I was like, I'm not doing any of it virtual just because when you're telling stories like this and they're really, really deep, it made sense for me to sit eyeball to eyeball with people. So I've been traversing the country and just interviewing the coolest people, everyone from like celebs like Teddy Mellencamp and Neve Schulman to like, all of our entrepreneurs that we look up to, like a David Meltzer, and then big, inspirational thought leaders like Tim Story. And I'm doing Ali Webb, who founded Dry Bar, Amanda Klutz, who's the, host of The Talk, and all these people that are just iconic and really exciting. And the show literally launched 2 months ago, and it's had like a really quick rise. I've done some really actually on well, this will air after this has taken place, but as of now, as of the time of this interview, this coming Friday, I'm going to be on the Today Show. So March 22nd, I'll be on the Today Show. But
Very
I've just
cool.
had the opportunity to do a lot of really fun media around it because I think, honestly, Justin, that people are hungry for an uplifting message like this. And I think the world is a dumpster fire, let's be honest. And anytime that people can get an uplifting message and also be entertained, it feels like they're in on that.
Yeah, and I know you also had a former guest and a friend of mine, Justin Wren, on your podcast as well.
Yeah.
And you talk about stories and journeys and where he is now, which is it's good to see he's in a good place now. And it was quite the journey for him. But I love his vulnerability, and I think what you're doing, talking about gratitude being the jumping off point, right? Like, I don't think many people are looking at it that way. A lot of people think, oh, you'll find gratitude later. Like, for you personally, how did you realize that it starts with gratitude and then you can create success off of that?
Great question. You want my little mic drop moment?
Sure.
Okay. So prior to all my success, I was a sick and suffering drug addict, like as dark as it comes, as dark and twisty as it comes, in my teens and my 20s. And it got really bad, like almost died really bad. And the thing about that is when you've been to the darkest depths, you see the light that much brighter. And that's kind of the whole point of this podcast is like turning your yucks into yums, just being like, okay, like this happened. Like, when I interview people like a David Meltzer, who's like, wow, I was the CEO of Samsung. And then I literally lost everything and filed for bankruptcy, which for a lot of people could be a real, a real drag. But like when he's able to look back on it and say, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Here's why, here's what I learned. We realize that we can all have this pivot point and a second chance. I got sober in my 20s and it was a really long, twisty journey, even the sobriety battle. I was a chronic relapser for many years. I just couldn't get it. And I think that it's when something doesn't come to you really naturally, and it's not like it doesn't come to you quickly, you're almost lucky because you have to work at it that much harder. Like I had to work to understand recovery. And what
Mm.
I understood finally to be true is it is all about gratitude. Like also, I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut. My mom is TV journalist Joan London. She hosted Good Morning America for 20 years. Most people wouldn't think that I would have become a drug addict necessarily. But what I can tell you from growing up in that lifestyle is I grew up around some of the wealthiest people in the world, and they are some of the most miserable mofos you will ever come across in your life because money ain't it. Money makes things a little softer, a little nicer, when you have all the foundations of your happiness, but you know, success doesn't equal happiness. Happiness brings success. And so for me, understanding that gratitude is the foundation of it all. And my husband and I say this every day. When we met 12 years ago, we were living in a studio apartment together. Today, we definitely don't live in a studio apartment. We live in a big, beautiful house that we've worked very hard for. However, if we lost it all tomorrow, the material things, I promise you, Justin, we would be just as happy together in that studio apartment because we have gratitude in our heart and in our soul. And that honestly, if you ask me, I think an attitude of gratitude is a heartbeat of happiness. Period. Full stop.
I love it. Although it'd be rough to lose the movie theater.
It'd be a real bummer to lose my movie. We bought this house in Pennsylvania and it's got, many bedrooms and a movie theater in it and all these fun perks, which is really, really cool. And we're really proud that we were able to buy this house. But yeah, it's just cash and prizes, right? It's just cash and prizes, but that's not the foundation.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you shared that because so part of my story that I share is my mom battled opioids for 20 years and she ended up ultimately losing that battle. Um, and I went, okay, I need to now find happiness. And I chased all the things that society told me to chase, right? Accolades, money, cars, the house, the girl, whatever. And I had all of those things, and Inc. magazine listed me as this, and I was an entrepreneur magazine, like all these things popping up long before you could buy your way onto these lists. I was waking up and being like, "What am I on? What is happening? Why is my thing blowing up?" And I realized I sat down one day and I go, I have all the things that I was chasing right now, and I was miserable. And I kind of looked back at my whole entire life and I realized two things. One, my mom didn't die because she was an addict. My mom died because she didn't love herself. And I realized the second piece was I didn't love myself either. And so when I looked at that, I went, okay, I need to now do the internal work. I need to figure out, like you said, how do I find gratitude in those rock bottom moments? And I'd love to hear from you when you were battling addiction, relapsing, all those things. What was your tipping point? When did you go, okay, enough's enough?
Well, I was very lucky because my mom finally came and banged down my door, but she was not able to do that for many years. So like I was kind of on my own for many years. She was just scared, right? She just didn't have the courage or the vocabulary to do it yet. I needed that little boost. But what I can tell you is like I just suffered from severe imposter syndrome and victim mentality. Um, and the imposter syndrome, I think, many times children of, well, really anybody that, they look up to or people of influence or celebrities, especially, I think it's pretty common to feel like, I just looked at my mom and she was America's sweetheart. And I was like, ain't me.
Mm.
Like it could never be, and it seems so overwhelming to try to live up to that I just went the complete opposite direction. And I fell in with a bad crowd. But then, I was a pretty high functioning addict. So I worked really hard. I was ambitious. I got the jobs. I was like in public relations in New York City, which, by the way, if you're looking to be an active addiction, PR is a great line of work. It's all champagne and cocaine and models and bottles. But I had this massive imposter syndrome because I knew deep down who I really was. And that was a hot mess, right?
Mm.
And it wasn't good. And so somebody asked me just yesterday, I was on a podcast out in Las Vegas, and he was like, what do you say to people who have like imposter syndrome and victim mentality? And I was like, you can't just wish your way out of that stuff. And gratitude, you can't just wish your way into it. Like, it is a practice. It is an exercise. I taught myself, I trained my neural pathways to intuitively think from a place of gratitude. Like, I wake up in the morning and my husband and I elbow each other in the ribs and we're like, can you believe another day we get to live this life? Like,
Mm.
we are so abundant and so unbelievably grateful. And it's amazing. But I wasn't born like that. Like, I did not fall out of the womb grateful. And same with the imposter syndrome. The reason I don't have imposter syndrome now is because I drink my own Kool-Aid. I believe my own hype because I've done the work. I know I can back it up. I know the stuff that I believe I'm good at because I've done the work around it. So, and I don't just mean professionally. I mean, like, being me, being the youiest you, you know what I mean? So it's all really an exercise. And I think it's interesting. I was a wellness expert first before I really kind of took it one click up to do a lot of personal and professional development. And in wellness, we understand when you go to the gym that when you're working a muscle, it's going to be uncomfortable, but you're going to sit through it because you're going to get the byproduct. You're going to get the biceps. You're going to get the abs. When it's discomfort in our mind, we have such a harder time sitting through it. We think something's wrong. We need to medicate it. We need to not feel like this. What's wrong with me? I have anxiety. Sometimes you just need to sit because, like, that's the work. The work doesn't feel like the work when you're in it. It just feels like a series of minor inconveniences and
Yeah.
struggles. But like, that's the work. The growth is on the other side.
How important do you think the rock bottom is to success? Like, there's two thoughts to this, right? One person believes you can't find that true happiness without going through struggle. And some people go, you can find it. For you, how important was that rock bottom moment?
I mean, there's plenty of people that have success without finding it. I don't think I ever would have been able to come out on the other side without it. I had what I call the gift of desperation. I'm so grateful for that gift because, like, but I will say this, like, I hit my bottom and then, like, found out I had a trap door. Like, it could go lower, like, and okay, okay. Because I keep that in my mind every single day. Like, that life's still available to me. It is right there at arm's length, right? Like, but I mean, I just rather go play in traffic than go back to that. It's just like it's so not an option. So for me, it was really great because what's happened on the other side of that. But here's the thing, like, there's a saying in recovery circles about keeping it green. Super important, right? Because, like, I've seen so many people when they have a slip, and we call that sobriety loses its priority, SLIP, when the job gets bigger and the relationship gets bigger and everything's, oh, I can't go to a meeting because I'm so important. Don't you know who
Mm.
I am? I'll tell you. You're cruising for bruising. So it's very important to me, and I'm lucky. My husband's sober too, so we really keep a recovery vocabulary close to us in our house. We try to stay humble. We try to let each other be perfectly imperfect humans. But all of this, it was news to me when I got into recovery. Like, I did not, like, what do you mean I'm not the victim? What do you mean, like, no one did this to me? I did it to myself. I got to take accountability. That was all news to me. So I actually feel really grateful. I wouldn't change a thing. And I almost feel bad sometimes for people who aren't alcoholics or addicts because, like, 12-step recovery is a really great blueprint for living, and it makes you realize a lot of things about yourself.
Yeah, I learned a lot of, I went to Alateen as a kid. And so learned a lot of that type of mentality and that thought process. I mean, I was probably in sixth grade going to Alateen. And so, when you see that, and now that we're talking about it, it's probably the beginning of my program of positive thinking, probably came from those meetings. And my dad now is an active member of AA. So obviously champion these things that can help support that struggle. And so as we talk a lot about struggle in this conversation, there's a lot of people, and it's funny because I said, do you need the rock bottom moment in order to define success? But I think everybody has a different rock bottom, right? You mentioned somebody making $1 million and losing it all. Most people who truly struggled in life went, wow, lucky you, right? Like, that's not quite the rock bottom moment compared to mine, right? But it's all about being empathetic to everybody's journey, right? They did a study one time. They took two children that were middle school age. One lived in the inner city. One kid was, the family was wealthy, et cetera. And they did scans of their brain. And the one kid who was wealthy was bullied by kids in the school, and the kid in the inner city watched his mom get shot and killed in front of him. And they saw that the damage to their brain was exactly the same. And so I think realizing that we all have our own hardships, but we can utilize that to catapult us to the next level. That's the game changer, right? And that's something that you did. You went, okay, I'm going to now take ownership. What would you say to somebody struggling right now, whether it be an addiction or just with depression or whatever the case may be? What would you say to them? And like, what's the first step to be able to take ownership of where you are in life?
You're only as sick as your secrets. Reach out and tell somebody else. Because, and here's the thing, this is why. So I'm so glad you just said that. There could be people that really look like they come from privilege. I was one of them, and people are like, what's wrong with you? Just be grateful for what you have. I don't know what's wrong with me. If I knew that, I wouldn't have these problems. You know what I mean? Like, you have to have empathy for people where they are. Like, money doesn't fix it. So, people have their own shit that they wake up with every single day, and everyone's on their own journey. And so, what I would say is, I got to imagine every single person. I'm gonna take a bold stance. Every single person listening to this podcast right now has something. What is that thing in your mind's eye that you're hanging on to right now that it's time to let go of? That's kicking your butt, that's holding you back, that's upsetting you. That's the first thing on your mind when you wake up, or the last thing before you go to bed at night. It's keeping you from being fully present with your kids. That's a secret, right? The fear of walking through that thing, I guarantee you, is worse than actually just getting up and walking over those hot coals to the other side. And that's really what it's all about. It's just about taking one step in the right direction, but don't do it alone, because doing it in a vacuum is where people fail.
Yeah, and I found that I think sometimes when you're in it, right, when you're feeling the guilt for your decisions or feeling terrible for where you are, we think that other people will judge us or not help us, but it's the exact opposite. When people truly love you, they'll literally thank you for coming to them, right? I think that's the barrier a lot of times. Like, oh gosh, that's scary, right? Like, I imagine the first time you walked into a recovery meeting, that was scary.
Terrifying. But I said this in my TEDx. It's like, when you don't tell someone when you don't ask someone you love for the help that you need, you're actually robbing them of an opportunity to be a hero.
Mm.
We were put on this earth to help each other and to like hold hands, and that's what humanity is about. Have you ever noticed that like little energetic thread that we have? We like to help each other. Like, it's people are inherently good. They just are. I see it every day. And when you don't tell, I work with a lot of women. When you don't, like, I tell them, when you don't tell the husband, you know, I work a lot with people with food issues, right? So like, I talked to somebody the other day, and I'm like, I'm going to change her name for her anonymity, but I'm like, Susan, how long have you been dealing with this? She struggles with binge eating disorder, which is so common, by the way. I can't even tell you how many people I talk to, and they're like, what? Sweet tooth. And then I like take it 2 clicks further, and they're like in tears, and they're like, I've been hiding the candy bar wrappers for years. And it's like, it's okay. It's so common. You don't need to be ashamed. By the way, people aren't usually ashamed. Like, these days, it's like, if you're an alcoholic, you're an addict, even the Family and Medical Leave Act, your job actually has to retain your role for you and just let you go to rehab. How many people would actually have the bravery to say, hey, job, boss, I have a problem with food. I can't close the refrigerator door. And when it's me and that pint of Ben and Jerry's and it's 9 p.m., that's the battle royale that I'm on the losing end of every time.
Hmm.
That's real shit. Okay. I'm sorry. That's the same as cocaine, but we don't give that the same credence, especially in this country. So I'm very much an advocate for people getting help with their problems with food, because it's the same thing. But I'll say to my women, like, how long have you been dealing with this, struggling? And she'll quite often say, like, well, since I was like a teenager, like at 14, 13, 14. And I'm like, Susan, you're 57, babe.
Hmm.
Like at what point, right, do you get to ask for help? Well, I don't want to bother my husband. It's like, at what point do you get to be vulnerable and just say, I'm really struggling? Because I have to imagine, if the husband loves you, he'd show up for you. So my first coaching program was called The Big Ask. And I would teach people, and I'll still coach people in this way. It's just not the primary that I focus on, but I teach people how to ask for help. First, you got to know what you're asking. So we would come up with that whole framework and structure. But I'll tell you, accountability works.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it is so big, and it's not funny how you framed it, but it's interesting. I think people would be more comfortable going, "Hey, I have a drinking problem. I have to go to rehab," versus, "Hey, I overeat," right? And especially in America, number one, our food is purposely made to be addictive. Number two, but the obesity rate, there's a larger obesity problem in America than a hunger problem, which is crazy when you think about it. And so I think people look around and go, "Oh, it's so common. There's not anything wrong with me. I'm just like everybody else." But clearly, that is an issue if you're allowing that to control your life. I think the realization of that is the first step, and then obviously asking for help, reaching out to an expert, reaching out to a loved one. And I think it's so important too in a marriage, like to share those things with your spouse, because otherwise you're living a lie in your relationship, right? And do you find, obviously, I imagine with that you mainly work with women, but do you find that it's women who are more afraid to ask for help than men?
Uh, Perhaps. I think, I found the food issue to plague women and they would feel so ashamed, just so ashamed. Women often, are trying to hold so much together. I mean, obviously we all are in this day and age, but especially during the pandemic, women were like running their full-time jobs and they're also running the households. And then they were just like, they're crumbling, and we lost our structure and it was just so hard. And you feel like you have to be a good role model for your kids. And then if I'm like failing, then it's like I'm a failure as a mother. There's just so much to unpack there. Um, but look, I mean, we all have the same struggle, right? With showing face. I just believe very much in making your mess your message. Like it, I believe in sharing your vulnerability story. I believe in being grateful for every part of you. Like I'm not ashamed of the part of me that was an addict. I'm not ashamed of the part of me that was a binge eater because that was after I got sober, I had a relapse with food, not with drugs. But it's actually what I share about in my TEDx. It's called Confessions of a Binge Eating Wellness Influencer because I was
Hmm.
already a wellness influencer who's supposed to have it all together. And I had a relapse with bulimia. And it was the worst thing. It was literally harder to get off of than cocaine. It was the worst thing that ever happened. As far as hijacking my brain, it was so hard to stop.
Yeah.
But I share that now because there's a lot of power in sharing that. And as soon as I say it out loud, by the way, it's no longer a secret that people can find out about me. It's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
I shared it first. So
Yeah, and it's so interesting too because like you said, that was your public persona versus what was behind the door. Whereas when it's usually drugs or alcohol, it's not your public persona, it's the hidden thing behind the door, and then the rest is the facade. And it's so fascinating to think about that, because I've never really had this conversation on the podcast, right? We've never talked about how far addiction stretches. It's so much more than what we really talk about in the public eye. So thank you so much for being a champion for that and helping people through that and being so vulnerable with your story because that's what changes the game, right? Somebody might listen to this episode and go, "You know what? That's me. I have to reach out and ask for help." And I think that's what's changing the game. I think that, and I'd love you to chime in on this. I think that as a society, we're getting better with vulnerability. And I think a lot of that is the rise of podcasts and people openly sharing their stories so often. Have you seen that?
absolutely. I really do see that a lot. In fact, for instance, the episode that came out, well, at the time of this interview, this week, it's Lori Harder. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's a
Mhm.
badass entrepreneur. And she started sharing this story. Like most of my guests finish the interview and they say, "Oh my God, I have like a vulnerability hangover. I've never shared that part of my story." Because that's what I do. I think a lot of times if they don't listen to the podcast first, they sit down and think it's going to be a normal interview. And I'm like, we're going to start at the beginning and I'm going to take you through your own story and we go there. But um she felt so empowered and she said she's not comfortable sharing it on social media yet because her family follows her there, but on podcasts she feels more empowered because it's long form content and she gets to explain it, right? It's not like encapsulated in 90 seconds where there could be room for misunderstanding. And it's just what it's her power that she's walking into now. She's reserved that part of her story for podcasts. It's this whole origin story that she has from her youth. She was raised in a fundamentalist religious sect, and it's very powerful. But she has reserved that for starting to kind of soft shoe into the podcast space and share it. And I think that's a very powerful choice to make because podcasting really offers this unique medium.
I'm blown away by how many people I've met over the last couple years who are raised in that type of environment. I've had a number of them on my show, and then I also had a guy on my show who later found himself in a cult in Manhattan. Like, just like it's just crazy to see how people can be manipulated, and then the guilt that they have around it, especially when they come out finally and they're like, okay, I'm free from it. I want to share this story. What do I do? And there's still that fear just because it's programmed in them, right? Now, obviously, a lot of this conversation, we're talking about a lot of rock bottom moments, but I think that the big takeaway here is beginning to take control of your life, being able to control all aspects of it, right? From your health to your sobriety to your relationships to your money, right? Being able to create your own money and your own time. For me, time is the most valuable asset. Like, the one thing I hang my hat on is that I probably work 3 hours a day. And so when I can say that, I'm like, okay, yeah, obviously I make more money now than I've ever made, but I don't care about that. Like, I care about the fact that I literally work 3 hours a day, and the rest I can be with my loved ones. I can do what I want. I can go hang out with a friend, whatever. And this is something that you help entrepreneurs do regularly. You help them create brand deals they never saw before. You help them create income that they might not be able to see. When did that start for you? When did you start helping others do that?
So this is fun. I was a publicist for 17 years prior to becoming all the things I mentioned at the beginning of this show. So I'll give you the timeline. In the beginning, when I was getting sober, I was starting my role as an executive in the public relations space in New York City. I worked my way up the PR ladder, took a little 3 year sabbatical while I was in treatment and getting sober. Went back to my sport, by the way, fun, like, factoid. I'm a horseback rider. So I went back and just literally took 3 years to focus on myself and getting sober, was teaching horseback riding for 3 years, came back, hit the ground running again in PR. So all in from the beginning to end, it was about 17 years in a career in public relations. At the end, I was running the accounts. I was running the book of business on brands like McDonald's, General Motors, LinkedIn, Pernod Ricard, W Hotels Worldwide, Barry's Boot Camp, and more. I was the one writing the influencer marketing briefs for the influencers. I was writing the creative briefs. I was running those programs, right? Like PR, that's what it is these days. It's no longer just earned media. It's largely influencers because that's how we move consumer behaviors these days. I'd started this Instagram account called NYC Fit Fam. And it was just mine and my husband's fit journey. Like, just as a fit couple, we love fitness. He proposed to me on a treadmill at Barry's Boot Camp. That got some media. It like started our journey as a public facing fit couple. The account started taking off, and I knew what to do with that. I knew how to monetize it and grow it and leverage it. And I was like, well, shit, this is a great side hustle. This is fun, you know? And I started getting brand deals. And eventually, after about 18 months, maybe 2 years of doing both, it had grown to an extent where I was like, it's time to pick a lane, right? Like, you're running the book of business on McDonald's and you're a burgeoning health and wellness influencer. Weird, right? A little awkward. Trying to pick a lane, but also, like, my side hustle was just about outpacing my full hustle. And I was like, okay. And I loved my job in PR. I didn't leave because I didn't like it, but I was like, I have a chance at an act too. And let me tell you something, Justin, like, people, including my mom, were like, you don't leave no good job with good benefits. What are you, nuts? You know? I was like, with all due respect, I think it's going to work. Within 18 months of leaving that job, I had 5x my salary, right? So I was making
Wow.
6 figures at that job. I had 5x it within 18 months. Um, I've never looked back. And so over the course of the last 5 years, so I left that job pregnant, and my son turns 5 next week. So that gives you a time frame, right? So about 5 years, just exactly. Um, I started making 5 to 6 figures a month, depending on the month, depending on the deal. But like with my brand deals, that's what I was kind of bringing in. And it's because I speak brand. I know how to, I ran the brands, right? I ran point on the other side of the table for years as I was doing the wellness stuff. And I was doing, so I'm on TV on shows like the Today Show, Good Morning America, Dr. Oz when it was a show, The View, and I'm full time on QVC as the face of their athleisure brand. It's called Zuda. So I was doing all the wellness stuff and the wellness coaching and wellness keynote speaking. And people were like, neat, glad you're doing the wellness thing. But what people really want to learn is, like, how do you become an influencer? So could you teach that course? And I was like, no, that sounds so lame. That sounds so lame to me. I don't want to teach people how to, like, take a pretty picture of an acai bowl and somehow that makes them a health expert. Like, I don't even believe in that. What I finally realized, Justin, was like, that's not what they were asking me to teach. They were saying, you were uniquely positioned as having 2 decades in PR, running the influencer programs, and now 5 years as a highly paid content creator. Teach us what's at the intersection of that. And I was
Mm.
like, okay, all right, that's a course. And I realized I would always joke. I was like, dude, they're like, how do you work with these brands like this? I was like, dude, I'm a brand ninja. Finally, I was like, that's my course. It's brand ninja. So I started teaching this course, and I literally teach people from soup to nuts. It's an 8-week course. By the time you leave, you will be able to literally get your first brand deal to pay back what you paid for the course. And I've seen it time and time again. So like it is like the most fun thing I've ever done because I truly geek out on my brand partnerships. Like I love working with brands. I believe in the brands I work with. I'm an ambassador for them on all, and I love being really real and honest in that space too. I've been on national TV 3 times for Metamucil. I've been on The View for a stress urinary incontinence product. So I'll talk about poop and I'll talk about peeing my pants. Like that's all to me part of, look, I'm a mom, right? Like I'm a fit mom. I had babies. Like this is all part of my life. So I look at my life as a movie. Every minute is ripe for product placement. And that's not exploitative. That's more in me looking at my life and saying, what am I doing this month? How can I leverage that moment? Whether it's I'm on a plane, I'm away from my kids, I'm with my kids, I'm doing this, I'm on business travel. I'm okay. How can I leverage that to add value, to add a storyline, to add narrative to a brand? And how can I fold a brand into that? So either they're a part of my storyline organically, or I'm leveraging my network of who I'm going to be with. Maybe I'm out on a podcast in Las Vegas, or I'm doing an event in LA. I'm going to figure out how to show up for these brands and to give them value, but I'm going to sell that moment of my life to make sure that I always have income coming in so I can infuse capital back into all these things I want to do, like producing a kick-ass podcast.
I love it. I love it. And so a lot of people are probably hearing this and going, well, I want to be able to rep brands, make money, but I don't have a huge following.
Yeah.
Is there a number that people are looking for? Do they need to be at a certain following on Instagram? What does that look like?
Well, I'll tell you 2 things. So, if you go to mybrandninja.com, there's like a little video and that'll bring you to kind of the checkout page, which I do put the marker there as 10,000 followers, just because at 10,000 followers, it opens up some functionality of Instagram. That's a kind of a good metric. However, I'm going to tell you a little secret and your listeners a little secret, which is that I don't believe you have to wait until you have 10,000 followers to start monetizing. So if that's not your story, you can always reach out to me on NYC Fit Fam and we can do an audit of your social, because I would never bring anyone into my program if I couldn't help them. I will tell you the round that I have right now, I have a live round that I'm doing right now. I literally just taught my Tuesday course that I teach every Tuesday at noon, right before I got on with you. Um, of the 10 people that are in that course, I want to say half of them have under 10,000 followers, but I know I looked at who they are. They're keynote speakers. They're journalists. One's a triathlete. They have spheres of influence. They have other things they can leverage. My keynote speaker friends, I'm like, okay, homie, you might only have 6,500 followers, but you like took audience, you were in front of last week, the CMO of Pepsi or the head of marketing for, the Gap or whatever. Somebody was just telling me, oh yeah, I just did the cocktail hour for my keynote speech with 250 nurses. I was like, hello, opportunities. I see opportunities everywhere that people may not understand where they could like fold a brand into that. So I wouldn't say that there's like a cut and dry answer that 10,000 is the cutoff. It is in my VFL if you go through my brand ninja. But if that's not your story and you're listening right now and you're like, I think you got something, I'd like you to evaluate it. Just reach out to me. My DMs are always open on NYC Fit Fam, because I don't believe that it has to be this magic number of 10,000. In fact, I've seen people monetize way lower than that.
Yeah, and I think too, like I think you're nailing it perfectly talking about like the niche market. You might have a very, very specific market that you're never going to get to 10,000 followers, but somebody's going to want to talk to those 3,000 people, those 6,000
100%.
people, who are you specifically talking to? And I think people are getting that now. I think people are understanding the importance of niching down. Like a lot of people cannot, like part of the success of this podcast, which is pretty broad. I mean, I've had every people from Burt Kreischer to, all these people on my show that are all over the map. Part of the success is I started 8 years ago, right? Like
Right.
I literally just the other day passed 8 years. And so like that was a big part of it. So a lot of people in the podcast space are understanding like, hey, if I niche down, if I'm talking to the 1,000 perfect people every single week, there's a lot of power in that, especially when you have their attention for 45 minutes, an hour every single week or whatever. And that's just something that I've loved to see. And I love that you're helping people really begin to uncover that and get paid for what they're passionate about, which is key. So I want to ask you a question that I ask every single person on this show. It's a 2-part question. The first part is, what is your definition of success? And the second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
Oh, such a great question. Definition of success is really just waking up and feeling successful, honestly, because everybody's metric is going to be different. You know what I mean? Like I wake up every day and I'm like, yes, this is it. We're doing the damn thing. Right. And the numbers fluctuate. My P&L doesn't look the same every month, but like, okay. Right. Like I'm doing what I want to do. I'm making money at it and helping other people. And that's kind of my definition of success. Three things I do every day. So, I really look at like obviously movement as really, really important, but for such different reasons than when I look like how I looked at it when I was younger. Right now it's not a means to an end anymore. Like I don't care if I'm the skinniest or the most shredded. I care that I am moving my energy and that I feel good and that I'm ready for the day. So movement is the first thing that I do. My husband and I both have a meditation practice in our life. It's a meditation and gratitude practice we do actually with our kids. So this is actually kind of cool. A lot of people are like, oh my God, how do you get your kids to do that? Mine would never sit. You keep it short. So we do meditation every morning before they go to school. We do 2 minutes of like just a meditation where we play a certain frequency, which is just, for it, it's a certain frequency. You can find it on YouTube. Just look up like meditation frequencies. And then we do three gratefuls and three affirmations. So they say three things they're grateful for, and three, like, I am strong, I am patient, I am brave, whatever. And that just sets the tone for the day. And by the way, that's data led. That's not woo woo.
Yeah.
Data led. You make a gratitude list, three things. You're initiating your parasympathetic nervous system, lowering your diastolic blood pressure, and reducing cortisol. Like you're literally better prepared to handle stress. And I would say the last thing that I do that I'm honestly, this is like my hand to God, just getting better at every day because I have not been great at it the last couple of years. I do not work only 3 hours a day. I would definitely put myself in like the workaholic category, but really because I love to work. Like I
Hmm.
come from the New York City hustle culture, so it's kind of in my DNA. But one thing I've been really cognizant of recently is like A, you can't take it with you, and B, there was an 80-year study out of Harvard. It was the longest study on happiness. They studied many different people over 3 generations, right? And they found that the number one predictor of happiness over money, over fame, over IQ, whatever, was your relationships.
Mm.
And so the most important thing for me is to invest in my relationships. To when I am done with my workday, to put my phone down for the hours between whatever it is, like 5 and 9. I can go back to work at 9, by the way. If I need to go to work back to work at 9 and work until 2, that's my business. But when I'm with my kids, they have my attention. And so investing in my relationships would be definitely my third thing.
Yeah, I love that, and I think relationships are the key to everything. And actually, I don't know if it was the same study, but they did do a study like happiness related to money, and they said every dollar after $75,000 a year does not add happiness.
Mm. Wow.
Crazy, crazy, right? Because after that, it's just things. And so it was really fascinating to me. Now, obviously, more money can get you trips and so on and so forth. We vacation a lot as a family. This year, we're taking 5, which is too many. But like it's one of those things where we're like, these are the things that we enjoy doing. Now, would we be as happy without them? 100%. It just kind of adds on to you know, moments, so to say. So I love that you brought that up. I want to ask you a question because you've built a lot of things that have really defined you in the public eye, right? Whether it be the podcast, being on QVC, sharing your story, whatever the case may be. But I want you to think about you at the end of your life, and all those things have been stripped away. Everything you've created no longer exists. If you could only be remembered for one sentence, what would that sentence be?
Ugh, I mean, I've always said this. I just want to take up my space on earth in the most bright, positive, sparkly ball of energy that I possibly can. When I was a little kid, your parents ask you what you want to be. And I said I wanted to be rainbow bright. And like the cool thing is when I think back on that, I'm like, yeah, I kind of did it. You know what I mean? Like, kind of did it. And I just want to stay in that because it's really easy to lean into the negative. A big part of gratitudology for me is just learning to love the parts that suck because there's usually lessons in there. So, every day at the end of the day, like even the parts that suck have value and merit, and just being grateful for even those is probably the key to happiness.
Yeah. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question. But before we get there, what's all the good stuff? How do people get a hold of you? How can they work with you? What's all that?
So I'm NYC Fit Fam on Instagram. That's where you can find me and DM me for anything, basically. You can go to mybrandninja.com to learn more about my brand program where I help people get 5 and 6 figure brand deals. And you can head on over to the Gratitudology podcast. You can either go to gratitudology.com or you can text the word gratitude to 33777 to get all the listen links directly to your phone.
I love it. I love it. So, like I said, Jamie, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Oh man. I mean, it's definitely for me when you have been sunk to such a depth that you just didn't think you were going to really make it past your 30th birthday. And just to be where I am today, um, getting sober really had everything to do with everything. But the reason wasn't just putting down the drugs. The reason was because I picked up this tool book for life, which was the personal development space. So just doing it's an inside job, period, full stop. The house isn't going to make it better. It's an inside job. And once you start doing that work, the growth comes as a byproduct.
Yeah, Jamie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I'm so glad that we connected in the way that we did, which we didn't even share on this. You were in my room at Podfest when I was speaking. We didn't even meet in person, but then Instagram, social media is such a great tool in order to stay connected. I'm excited to see where this friendship goes. Thank you so much.
Agreed. Me too. And thank you so much for having me.